Now, time for our next keynote presentation. That's empowering the hybrid IT journey. This is one I have been looking forward to. Our guest is Jason Carolan. He's Chief Innovation Officer at Flexential. Hi, Jason. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us. And I'll leave the floor to you, and we'll get around to some questions at the end.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I know we're hitting a few different time zones here across the world, so great to be here. Again, Jason Carolan, Chief Innovation Officer at Flexential. I'll get into what Flexential is in a bit, but wanted to spend just maybe 2 seconds on what the heck is hybrid IT. So really it's about helping companies find the best optimal solution for their various IT workloads and dealing with different aspects like security, integration, development, resiliency, all the things that we've come to care about here in the last 4 or 5 years of really being a network-focused economy and really a network-focused world. So last stat I saw from Gartner was that 70% of companies are out there looking for adaptable, flexible infrastructure. So we'll talk about some of the best practices and maybe where to go here in your hybrid IT strategy and journey. We're a hybrid IT company as well, so even though we build big data centers like the one sitting behind me and have various cloud and managed services capabilities, we host our portal as an example on top of a hyperscale public cloud. So again, just to dive into this here, it's a very dynamic, fast-paced environment. Technology is advancing in complexity, I think, on a minute-by-minute basis. I think every single day I feel like I read some new AI, chatbot, generative AI platform that's being launched. Certainly has been fun to explore that and see where that goes. Workloads are becoming more and more distributed as we pay more attention to resiliency, but also latency and what that network experience is like. End user expectations are higher than ever, right? You can't go down, always on. And the role of the IT leader has really expanded to not just being sort of behind the scenes, but in the forefront in this digital first economy. I have the honor and privilege to run our customer advisory council. So we have about 3,500 customers, about 20 or so are on our customer advisory council that help us formulate our products and capabilities. And when talking to them, 3 areas really resonated. One is improving application performance and reliability, making sure you have the SLAs to go meet those advancing capabilities and requirements. Visibility is really important for capacity planning and performance. Providing agility and ability to scale. Certainly most applications, you might be doing development in the cloud, but as you start to scale up those applications, where is the best place to go put those workloads? And we'll get into that here in just a minute. And then delivering superior network performance. So, again, the network is the basis of our economy these days. I don't ever stand in line at a Starbucks anymore. It's really through the mobile app. And you just think about the complexity of that, going across the cellular network from my phone to their centralized platform, ultimately to an order that's placed in the store that I'm standing right next to. There's a fair amount of complexity in that, but again, we've become very used to this always-on kind of the network economy, and I certainly don't see that that's changing anytime soon. So reliability really is key. So thinking about those use cases and then the stack, right? So we've been in this fourth industrial revolution probably for the last 4 or 5 years. It changed a bit and maybe accelerated during the pandemic. But it's really a basis of technology services that are layered on top of all these foundational everything as a service capabilities. So whether that's the 5G network, we're hearing 5.5G now and 6G, Wi-Fi 6, the fiber in the world, C cables. What do we think about edge computing? What do we think about the chips, right? Moore's law isn't dead. It's just coming in a different form factor, which, honestly, we're learning every single day with a lot of the use cases we're getting around generative AI and some of the machine learning applications. So that's a complex stack, right? And as I mentioned, AI is sort of coming at full pace here. Just to give you an idea of semiconductor revenue, right? It's not displacing common workloads today, but as you start to look at the future, AI-enabled accelerated chips are really winning the game, and it's just the beginning for us to understand, what the impact is on the economy, but also workloads and perhaps even our jobs as we start to look at the early innings of artificial intelligence and how we can use that going forward. So super exciting time, but also very complicated, right? So a typical CIO, this is a slide from Gartner, is dealing with a lot, right? And whether it's increasing geopolitical issues, whether it's the supply chain disruptions that we've been dealing with for the last couple of years, increasing inflation, which is driving efficiency and how can I do more with less, but also making sure I can stay competitive. and looking at my data and how I use data and IoT and other applications to make sure I can maintain my competitive advantage. Security and risk, right? That hasn't gone away, right? It's probably almost gotten worse as we've had cryptocurrency and other formats that allow us to go make it easy to go attack potentially a competitor or disrupt a hospital system or a nonprofit. And then the labor and skill shortage. When I talk to CIOs, even though there's been a lot of news on technology-related layoffs, still finding the right set of skills to go drive the business forward is a key concern. So you need business partners to really help you through that. So a little bit on Flexential. As we talked about, this flexible infrastructure is really a requirement in doing business today in the world. Our platforms really were designed to make sure that we can not put one size fits all sort of into the equation for our customers, but making sure that we're flexible and can kind of adapt over time based on their changing needs. So we do that with, first of all, building data centers, like I mentioned behind me. And we do this in 20 markets across the US. So we're pretty US focused, although we have connectivity, and we'll get into connectivity a bit, really across the world, especially Napa, the Northwest, which is what we call the Portland area now, and all of its cable connectivity into Asia primarily. But we also have cable connectivity into South America and into Europe, and really build a network across the United States. What you don't see here is all these data centers are connected. So if you're in one of our facilities, you really have dynamic access to any of our tier 2, tier 3 locations across the United States. Also, you have connectivity to all the hyperscalers as well. So we know, again, that the average company uses 5 to 8 different cloud providers. We want to make sure that we can provide very easy, quick access to those platforms across the world. We also have a set of private and managed services that allow customers to have private infrastructure that maybe they don't want to go manage it themselves, right? So co-location is you're managing the servers and you're putting them in and installing them. We have remote hands to help you. Certainly with cloud, you're used to just sort of using it as a service or renting it. That's a capability we have as well. Again, isolated, so you don't have noisy neighbor problems. You understand your bill. And then value-added services really spanning managed services, data protection, disaster recovery, business continuity, connectivity. But we also have a professional services group that's very outcome-based that allows companies to sort of, take the best of what we have to offer, help them sort of drive that transformation forward and use our resources as it makes sense. As I mentioned, again, that skill shortage is really top of mind for most of the CIOs out there. We also have a very broad customer base, really, across all the major segments and verticals: finance, healthcare, networks, mobility, software, really across the world, right? So while we're focused on the U.S., a lot of them are global companies that we help enable, in some way, shape, or form across the world. Sustainability also very important. We were one of the first to announce our green bond offering a couple of years ago, which I think was first in its class. That requires us to be very specific in how we use electricity and water and making sure that we're as efficient as possible. So we have a whole team really focused on the ESG journey and how sustainability plays an important role in these advancing workloads, right? AI workloads take a lot more energy, right? So making sure that we can go support that down the road, as again, we see these advancing applications require more and more horsepower. So that's really Flexential in a nutshell. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on, what do you need to do to go build out a hybrid IT strategy? And again, this is from best practices and use cases that we've gotten from our customers, the 3,500 or so that we have, but also really diving deeply with our customer advisory council. So building a hybrid strategy, I think, has 4 major pillars, and I'll talk about these in some detail here. First of all, strategy and governance. I do think IT as a whole over the past probably 30, 40 years, governance is kind of a bad word. So anyway, I probably think of it more as governance with a little g, but it's really important to make sure that you've got the rule set in place inside your organization to make sure that you're using your IT capabilities and infrastructure and managing the cost and just making the right decisions as you go down the road. And applications have a tendency to change over time. They become very stable. You start to retire various components. You start to retire users from it, and then you can start to change that footprint, right? So making sure that you've got a team that can go have those conversations across the business. I actually run our internal IT group here. We have an IT committee that runs, that's all the major stakeholders, that runs really across the business. as a virtual team to make sure we're making the right decision and keeping those stakeholders in mind. Organizations can achieve greater flexibility, scalability, security, lower IT costs when they look at the workload placements, and that's really what some of this governance conversation is about. It's also about co-location, multi-cloud, edge. How do those different platforms kind of span the equation? There's different latency requirements now for new applications. If you're pulling real-time video to enable some new AI service in your manufacturing environment to help, maybe it's quality, maybe it's to help secure the environment, maybe it's help to make sure that workers are safe in the environment, and you can shut down equipment very quickly if something happens. There's, video and LiDAR technology now that can actually detect whether there's a person wearing gloves or not, right? Is a person wearing eye protection? So those types of things are use cases that can be enabled, and you want really fast response time to make sure that you can go turn those services off. We talked about connectivity, right, and how important that is. We'll touch on that here in just a second as well in more detail. And then again, sustainability. So all the companies today have sustainability goals and are trying to make sure that they're driving, cost, but also helping the environment at the same time to ensure that we've got a planet, here in the future that we can pass on to our kids and not completely mess up. So I know that's super important for a lot of our customers as well. Security and compliance. I've always joked it's kind of hard to send an auditor to a hyperscale data center in the middle of some place that you barely know its name. So making sure that you can go meet the regulatory requirements that you might have, and this continues to adapt and change. China just announced their privacy law, which has different attributes if you're doing business in China or Chinese companies. We've had GDPR for a few years now. Certainly, the United States continues at a state level to change its regulatory requirements for data breaches and notifications and things like that. So staying on top of that, as well as just overall, whether it's PCI or HIPAA, healthcare security requirements, it's complicated, right? It's an area that you can never probably have enough tools in the toolbox, and making sure that you've got a secure environment, and there isn't anything, insecure about the cloud. It's really, the issue that the public cloud has had around security has really just been, it's been new, right? And the skill sets haven't evolved. Now public cloud is as secure as really as you can make it, right? And that's the key, right? So there's nothing special about it or bad about it. It's just making sure that you've got the right skills to be able to do it. Integration and management. I'm amazed at how many companies, when they go kind of down a public cloud only strategy, that they are shocked by the number of firewall rules and the number of network changes and the number of egress fees, and really how much sort of things they've had to go do from an integration perspective that they weren't planning on. And that also makes it complicated. But the good thing is we're starting to learn more and more about it, and we're starting to have solutions that allow us to do low or no code integration between these different platforms, whether it's infrastructure as a service or software as a service. So being able to really handle that on an ongoing management basis. Single pane of glass, right? Having visibility is still a big challenge for a lot of CIOs, is to understand where is my application, what is it integrated with, how am I seeing the workflows, how am I securing it because of the different integration requirements that I might have. So this is really a big area of focus that kind of goes back to old school architecture, and just making sure that you're able to explain how system diagrams work, how process diagrams work, making sure your security team is very involved in the process so that you're not exposing something that perhaps you will regret down the road. And then culture and skill sets. So in our world, I call them the server huggers. There's people that want to be able to know where their servers are and kind of want to go in and see them and sort of touch them. Co-location is great for that, because you have access to the environment. It's your cage, it's your platform. And we even have customers that use our private cloud that want to go see it, right? And that's infrastructure as a service, but they have peace of mind by just knowing it's there, right? Or perhaps their DR environment is someplace else. Well, where is that, right? So being very specific, which is sometimes a little bit hard in the public cloud because different availability zones have different levels of complexity. Developers, right? They want to be able to develop fast. They want to be able to do it without having a lot of barriers to entry. Public cloud is great for that. And then as applications continue to scale, and I always call it when you start getting that revenue based on the platform, then maybe it start thinking about how to have it become more efficient, maybe by looking at co-location or private infrastructure or something like that. And then dealing with change, right? Change management, culture change, right? I mean, these are all different things that we have to worry about on a daily basis. And as I mentioned, AI and its impact here is a growing, cultural change and perhaps change inside the workforce as well. So those are some of the attributes to think about in terms of that strategy. As I mentioned before, workloads are really becoming much more distributed, and there's a few factors to that. One is the growth of IoT, the growth of 5G, the growth of just cellular networks in general, and just always on connectivity requires us to really grab that data quickly and figure out what we want to go do with it. Data is basically tripling every 2 years, right? So the amount of data we're collecting and the amount of data we're processing, or even with AI, the amount of data that we're using for training is growing very, very rapidly. And that's where the core data centers come into play, which is where the big data lakes are, where your big AI, perhaps machine learning platforms are, your big data processing platforms, where are you going to do your training? And then ultimately to the edge data center and to edge applications that really start to collect data, make fast decisions, and the inference type of use cases. So this is really has gone into full gear during COVID, right? Because you think about the content delivery networks, you think about being able to stream video and applications, you think about this capability that we're doing right now has really been built out by, one, the fiber in the ground that was being deployed to go support the 5G networks, but ultimately this distributed set of workloads and distributed set of applications that enable this technology going forward, which again, we're just in the early innings of that. So again, not one size fits all. There's a whole bunch of considerations that you want to take a look at here in terms of where should I put my workload today and tomorrow, right? If the average company, average large enterprise maybe has 1,000 applications, they use 5 to 8 different clouds at a minimum. There's a lot of decisions that feed into this process, and making sure you've got kind of a good set of governance and architecture and capabilities internally is imperative. Again, there's a bunch that goes into it, whether it's latency, performance, scalability, availability requirements. What is the actual requirements of the application itself, the various dependencies, like I talked about, the amount of stitching you have to go do to make an application work someplace else, right? And the amount of integration perhaps that you didn't consider when that workload was just sitting in one spot. And then operational, right? We talk a lot about the skill sets, control and visibility, that single pane of glass. How am I monitoring it? How do I know if it's down? Security, compliance, financial, right? Cost structure, cost predictability, still is a big issue, right? For companies that get a surprise bill in the mail from a hyperscaler, it's challenging, right? There are some companies out there that are fully run on the hyperscalers that are spending $200-300 million a year, right, for these applications, and it makes sense for them. They've got a cost model that works there. But for other companies, especially smaller ones, the complexity of the cost management and the various fees, and how many API calls did I make, or how did my network egress fees change when I moved some data around, becomes very complicated for them to figure out, which is, frankly, why a lot of the hyperscalers have invested in cost management, companies that they've bought to really help their customers manage that. Really just put this up here as a reference point to kind of drive into some of the other decision making for this. I'm not going to go into the detail here, but just wanted to make sure you had it, because it does sort of go through some of the attributes and some of the pluses and minuses perhaps in some of those decision making. Again, just thinking about how to go build the best platform that you can, which is really what hybrid IT is about, is really, again, not just one solution, but really driving into a best of breed approach. And then finally, cloud connectivity. So as I mentioned, if a company uses 5 to 8 different clouds, then optimizing connectivity becomes really important. The internet can be great at times, but it can also be a little staticky at times, or perhaps the reliability of the service is not there. So a lot of companies are exploring how do you get fast connectivity to the hyperscalers across their different environments, and doing it sort of outside the internet, right? So there's another path, and that's using express route, direct connect, things like that, to be able to enable those types of applications and their connectivity. So as I mentioned before, in our footprint, we actually have what we call Cloud Fabric, which allows us to go have access to any of the 25 major cloud ramps across the U.S. and really internationally as well. So cloud connectivity is super important to help to optimize the experience. And I guess finally, some just key takeaways, routes. So cloud adoption, understanding the workloads and where to go put them, and it's not a one-time decision. It's something that really does need a governance model kind of put around. Security, right? Still, certainly top of mind, top, 2 areas that most CIOs are worried about. Integration, I talked about how, that is a very fundamental building block in terms of building IT services, but is an area that a lot of companies get really surprised on. Management and governance, again, can you get to that single pane of glass or that unified management model? And then continuing to develop the culture and skill sets of your team to understand the ongoing changes of the environment, how to look at AI and what that impact is, what's your data science team look like? So all things to consider as we go down this hybrid IT journey. So hopefully you learned a little bit there and appreciate the time today.
Jason, thank you very much indeed. A couple of questions, if we can, whilst we've still got you with us here at Data Center Live. Anything to do with AI is really getting traction with the audience today, so I'll start there. For you, how is the rise of AI applications, how is that going to impact data center development in the coming years?
I think it's going to have a big impact. I think there was a stat from Intel in just a recent presentation they did, might have been an earnings presentation, that 40% of their chips by 2027 will be AI accelerated. The fact of the matter is that AI accelerated chips have a tendency to use more energy, need more cooling. So the way we design our data centers has to take that in mind, right? We're worried about sustainability, so there's pros and cons kind of in all of this as well. So a big push towards sustainability, but how do we do that in a cost-effective way to support these next-generation workloads and making sure we're designing for the right balance? So definitely top of mind, whether it's looking at liquid cooling solutions, but just trying to be as efficient as we possibly can for these growing workloads.
Yeah, that balance again, that's another issue that keeps on coming up. But as costs for cloud solutions decrease, how much spend do you see businesses continuing to make on physical data centers? Will hybrid setups be more heavily cloud focused moving forward? How do you see that particular balance?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as sort of a mix and match. I think, right now the hyperscalers, they're not edgy enough, right? They don't have deployments in every major metropolitan area, which, if you're an organization like a large retailer that has a presence across the world, right? You're maybe looking for different, types of deployment models to support those edge type applications. So I think, data centers will exist forever, right? Because the hyperscalers need them too. So it's a mix and match of placement decisions, but also, enabling the hyperscalers, the content networks and things like that to go do their work as well. So, the cloud needs a data center just as much as data center needs the cloud.
That is a very good way to finish. Jason, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed your company here today, and thank you for joining us here at Data Center Live London.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much.